The rich rancher invited the saloon maid's daughter to play poker for fun, not knowing she was a child genius. Now 12-year-old Sarah Washington laid down a perfect straight flush while Cornelius Blackwood stared at his losing hand like a man watching his own execution. The Silver Dollar Saloon held its breath. Dust motes hung suspended in the amber light, filtering through grimy windows. The usual cacophony of clinking glasses and raucous laughter died to nothing. Every eye fixed on the impossible sight before them. A mountain of gold coins sat before a child whose feet barely touched the floor. Blackwood's face flushed red as prairie clay. His thick fingers trembled against the green felt table. The most powerful rancher in 3 territories had just been beaten by a girl who shouldn't even be in this room. Sarah's small hands shook as she reached for the coins. Her dark eyes remained fixed on the table, not daring to meet the stares burning into her from every direction. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on her thin shoulders like a physical thing. "That's impossible," Blackwood whispered. His voice carried the hollow sound of a man whose world had just shifted beneath his feet. The crowd pressed closer, miners with dirt still caked under their fingernails, cowboys with sun-weathered faces, saloon girls with painted smiles frozen in shock. All of them drawn to witness something that defied every law of their small, predictable world. Sarah finally looked up. Her voice came out soft as morning mist. "Thank you for teaching me, Mr. Blackwood. Should we play another hand?" The innocence in her tone cut through the tension like a blade. Here was a child who had just accomplished the impossible, asking for more with the same politeness she might use to request a glass of water. Blackwood's chair scraped against the wooden floor as he pushed back from the table. The sound echoed through the silent room like a gunshot. His eyes never left Sarah's face, searching for some sign of the cunning that had just dismantled him. So completely, how? The word escaped his lips before he could stop it. Sarah tilted her head with genuine confusion. "How what, sir?" The crowd began to murmur. Whispered conversations sparked like small fires throughout the room. The impossible had just become real, and everyone present knew they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Old Pete, the bartender, leaned heavily against his polished counter. His weathered hands gripped the wood until his knuckles turned white. In 30 years of serving drinks and watching games, he had never seen anything like this. Martha, one of the saloon girls, covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with a mixture of amazement and fear. She had watched Sarah grow up in the shadows of this place, always quiet, always observing. But this revelation changed everything. The batwing doors burst open. Odessa Washington rushed in, her cleaning rags still clutched in her fists. The panic in her eyes spoke of a mother who had discovered her child missing and feared the worst. Her gaze swept the room until it found Sarah at the poker table. The sight stopped her cold. Her daughter sat surrounded by more money than their family had ever possessed, while the most dangerous man in the territory watched her with the focused intensity of a hunting cat. "Sarah," Odessa's voice cracked like dry leather. "What are you doing?" The child turned toward her mother. For the first time since laying down her cards, genuine emotion flickered across her features. "I won, Mama. I won enough to buy our farm." The words hung in the air like smoke. Around them, the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Everyone knew the Washington family's dream. Odessa had worked 3 jobs for years, saving every penny toward purchasing a small piece of land outside town. It was the kind of impossible dream that kept people moving forward when everything else seemed hopeless. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. He studied Sarah with the careful attention of a man reassessing a threat he had initially dismissed. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Sarah's fingers traced the edge of the table. "I watch sometimes, when Mama's working. You all seem to enjoy it so much." The simplicity of her answer made it somehow more unsettling. This wasn't the response of a seasoned gambler or a practiced cheat. This was a child who had observed and learned through nothing more than patience and intelligence. "Nobody learns to play like that just by watching," Blackwood said. His voice carried a new edge, sharp as winter wind. The crowd sensed the shift in atmosphere. The initial amazement began transforming into something darker. Tension crept through the room like rising floodwater. Everyone present understood that this moment balanced on a knife's edge. Sierra met Blackwood's stare without flinching. "Maybe you're not as good a teacher as you thought." The innocence in her voice made the words cut deeper than any intended insult. She had delivered the observation with the same matter-of-fact tone she might use to comment on the weather. But in this room, filled with men who measured their worth by their ability to outplay and outmaneuver others, her words landed like physical blows. Blackwood's hand moved toward the coins, then stopped. His fingers hovered over the gold, trembling with barely contained rage. The entire room watched that hand, understanding that his next move would determine whether this story ended in wonder or tragedy. "Keep your winnings, little girl," he said finally. His voice carried the quiet menace of distant thunder. "But understand something, in this territory, I make the rules. And I don't forget when someone makes a fool of me." The threat hung in the air like the scent of approaching storm. Sierra's small hands closed around the coins, but her eyes never left Blackwood's face. In that moment, the child and the man measured each other across more than just a poker table. They were separated by age, race, power, and circumstance. But in that suspended moment, something passed between them that transcended all those differences. A recognition, a challenge, a promise that this game was far from over. 4 hours before that impossible hand, Sierra Washington sat in the saloon's kitchen corner with a piece of brown paper spread across her lap. Numbers covered every inch of the wrinkled surface. Calculations that would challenge grown men flowed from her pencil stub in neat, precise columns. The kitchen air hung thick with grease and steam. Odessa scrubbed the wooden floors on her hands and knees, her movement steady as a metronome. The rhythm of her work had become the soundtrack, too. Sierra's childhood. Scrub, rinse, ring. Scrub, rinse, ring. Through the bat-wing doors came the familiar sounds of the afternoon poker game, cards shuffling against felt, coins clinking into growing pots. The low murmur of men calculating odds and reading faces. Sierra's lips moved silently as she watched. Her mind tracked every visible card, every betting pattern, every tell that betrayed a player's thoughts. She had memorized the mathematical probability of every possible hand combination months ago. Now she studied the human element that made the game truly complex. "Sierra, baby, stop staring at those gamblers." Odessa's voice carried the weight of countless similar warnings. "Nothing good comes from that table." The child's pencil paused against the paper. She looked up at her mother's tired face, seeing the lines that had deepened over years of endless work. 3 jobs. Dawn to midnight. All for the dream of owning a small farm outside town where they could build something that belonged to them. "I'm just watching, Mama. I know what you're doing." Odessa sat back on her heels, her cleaning rag dripping onto the floor. "That mind of yours sees patterns everywhere. But some patterns are dangerous." Sierra folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her dress pocket. The numbers would wait. They always did. Mathematics was patient in ways that people rarely were. The afternoon light shifted through the grimy windows, casting long shadows across the saloon floor. Sierra had learned to read time by the way those shadows moved. Soon the serious gamblers would arrive, the men who played for more than entertainment. The bat-wing doors swung open with unusual force. Cornelius Blackwood entered with the swagger of a man who owned everything he could see and most of what he couldn't. His expensive boots clicked against the wooden floor like a countdown to something inevitable. 2 men followed him. His foreman, Jake Turner, and a nervous-looking stranger in a dusty suit. They settled at a corner table, speaking. in voices too low for casual listeners to overhear. Sierra's attention sharpened. She had learned that whispered conversations often contained the most important information. Her ears strained against the distance and ambient noise. "Phase 2 starts tomorrow," Blackwood said. His voice carried the satisfaction of a man whose plans were falling into place. "The Henderson property is officially mine as of this morning." The stranger shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "The documents you provided were convincing. But if anyone examines them too closely, nobody will." Blackwood's confidence filled the space around him. "Who's going to question my word in this territory?" Jake Turner leaned forward. "What about the other properties? The families who refuse to sell? They'll come around." Blackwood's fingers drummed against the table. "Everyone has a breaking point. Everyone has something they can't afford to lose." The words settled into Sierra's memory like seeds in fertile ground. She understood enough about adult conversations to recognize threat when she heard it. The Henderson family had disappeared 2 weeks ago. Their farm sat empty now, its windows dark and fields unworked. Odessa appeared beside her with a fresh bucket of soapy water. "Come help me with the guest rooms upstairs." Sierra followed her mother through the narrow hallway that led to the saloon's upper floor. The stairs creaked under their feet, a wooden symphony of age and constant use. Each step carried them further from the whispered conversation below. The guest rooms were small and sparse. Beds with iron frames and thin mattresses, wash basins with cracked porcelain. Windows that looked out over the main street were dust. Devils danced between the buildings. "Sierra," Odessa's voice was softer now, away from the public spaces downstairs. "I know you hear things, adult things, but you can't let curiosity put you in danger." The child nodded, but her mind was already working through what she had overheard. Blackwood's influence reached into every corner of their small world. The bank, the territorial offices, the businesses that kept the town running. If he was taking properties by force, who could stop him? What would happen to us if he wanted our savings? The question escaped before Sierra could stop it. Odessa's hand stilled on the bed linens she was smoothing. "Why would you ask that?" He said everyone has something they can't afford to lose. The silence stretched between them. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window frames and sending dust spiraling past the glass. The sound carried the restless energy of a storm building beyond the horizon. "We keep our heads down," Odessa said finally. "We work hard, save our money, and don't give anyone reason to notice us." But Sierra had already been noticed. She had felt Blackwood's eyes on her during his previous visits to the saloon. The way he watched her watch the poker games. The slight frown that crossed his features when he saw her calculating something on her ever-present scraps of paper. They finished the upstairs rooms in silence. Each made bed and swept floor felt like a small act of defiance against the chaos that seemed to be building around them. Order imposed on disorder, control claimed in small spaces. The sun was setting when they returned to the main floor. The saloon had filled with its evening crowd. Cowboys spending their pay on whiskey and cards. Miners washing away the dust of another day underground. The usual collection of drifters and dreamers who populated every frontier town. Blackwood had moved to the poker table. His pile of coins grew steadily as the night progressed. He played with the casual confidence of a man who had never known real loss. Every bet was calculated, every bluff delivered with perfect timing. Sierra resumed her position in the kitchen doorway. Her notebook appeared again, filled with fresh observations. She tracked the flow of cards, the patterns of betting, the subtle tells that each player revealed without knowing. "You watch that game like you're studying for an exam," old Pete observed from behind the bar. "Maybe I am." The bartender chuckled, but his eyes held a trace of concern. "That's not a game for little girls. Those men play for keeps." "I know." Sarah's pencil moved across the paper, recording another sequence of cards. That's what makes it interesting. The evening wore on. Players came and went from the poker table, but Blackwood remained constant. He won more hands than he lost, his pile of coins growing like a golden mountain. But Sierra noticed something others missed. He was getting drunk, not on whiskey, but on power. On the certainty that he was untouchable in this small corner of the world. It was making him careless. "Come here, little girl." Blackwood's voice cut through the ambient noise of the saloon. "Want to learn a man's game?" The words landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Conversations paused. Heads turned. Everyone understood they were witnessing something that would either be amusing or tragic. Sierra looked up from her notebook. Across the smoke-filled room, Blackwood waited at the poker table. His eyes held the predatory gleam of a cat that had cornered a mouse. Around her, the saloon held its breath. The moment balanced on a knife's edge between safety and danger, between remaining invisible and stepping into the light where anything could happen. Her mother's warning echoed in her mind. Some patterns were dangerous. Some games were played for keeps. But as she studied Blackwood's confident smirk, Sierra realized something he didn't. She had been preparing for this moment her entire life. Every calculation, every observation, every quiet hour spent learning the mathematics of human nature had led to this invitation. She closed her notebook and walked toward the table. Sierra's bare feet whispered against the wooden floor as she approached the poker table. The chair Blackwood pulled out for her was too tall, leaving her legs dangling in the air. She had to stretch to reach the green felt surface where fortunes were won and lost. The cards felt foreign in her small hands, heavier than she had expected. She fumbled with them deliberately, letting two fall to the floor. The practiced clumsiness drew chuckles from the men gathered around the table. "So if I have two of the same number, that's good?" Her voice carried the trembling uncertainty of a child trying to understand an adult world. Blackwood's confidence swelled. "That's right, little darling. Two of a kind beats a single pair." Behind her innocent questions, Sierra's mind worked with mechanical precision. She had memorized the deck's composition within the first 3 hands. 26 cards remained. The probability of Blackwood completing his flush was 12%. She let herself lose the first hand, then the second. Each defeat brought squeals of delight from the crowd and deeper satisfaction from Blackwood. He was teaching a lesson about the natural order of things, about where power resided in their small world. The third hand arrived with a shift in the room's atmosphere. The wind outside picked up, rattling windows and sending dust devils spinning down the main street. Inside, the lamplight flickered against the growing darkness. Sierra received her cards with the same fumbling uncertainty. But this time, mathematics and opportunity aligned. She held 3 kings and 2 sevens. A full house that would beat anything, except 4 of a kind or a straight flush. The betting began slowly. Blackwood raised the stakes with casual arrogance. Around the table, other players folded one by one until only the man and the child remained. "I think I'll bet everything I have," Sierra said. Her voice carried the reckless enthusiasm of someone who didn't understand the consequences. The room fell silent. Her pile of coins was small compared to Blackwood's mountain of gold, but it represented everything the Washington family had scraped together over months of backbreaking work. "Are you sure, little girl?" Blackwood's eyes gleamed with predatory satisfaction. "That's a lot of money for someone your age. You said this was about learning. I want to learn what it feels like to win big." The innocence in her voice made the words more devastating than any calculated insult. She had turned his own condescension into a weapon against him. Blackwood called her bet. His cards revealed a strong hand. 3 aces with a pair of 9s. Under normal circumstances, it would have been enough to win against any amateur player. Sierra laid down her full house with trembling fingers. The silence stretched like a held breath. Then the room exploded in astonished murmurs. The impossible had happened again. The child had won through what appeared to be pure luck. Beginners. Luck, Blackwood muttered. His face flushed red as summer clay. It happens sometimes. But Syrah was already studying him with new intensity. Her questions became more pointed, though they maintained their childlike curiosity. Mr. Blackwood, you know so much about everyone in town. How do you keep track of all their business? The question landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Blackwood's eyes narrowed slightly. What do you mean? Well, you knew the Henderson family was leaving before anyone else did. And you always seem to know when someone's having money troubles. Around the table, the other players shifted uncomfortably. The Henderson family's sudden disappearance had been the subject of much speculation. Their farm sat empty now, its fields unworked and windows dark. I keep my ear to the ground, Blackwood said carefully. Information is valuable in business. Like bank information? Syrah's voice maintained its innocent tone, but her words carried a sharper edge. I heard you talking about documents earlier. They must be very important. The room's temperature seemed to drop. Edgar Finch, the banker, looked up from his position at the bar. His weathered face showed the first signs of concern. Blackwood's confidence wavered. What exactly are you suggesting? Nothing, sir. I'm just curious about how business works. Syrah arranged her cards with deliberate care. My mama always says information is power. I think she's right. The next hand began with visible tension crackling through the air. Syrah's questions had planted seeds of doubt in minds that had previously accepted Blackwood's explanations without question. She continued her strategy of deliberate losses mixed with unexpected victories. Each win seemed to surprise her as much as anyone else. But her questions grew more precise with each passing hand. The bank seal on those Henderson documents looked so official, she observed during a lull in the betting. Mr. Finch, you must be proud of how important your seal makes people feel. Edgar Finch's face went pale. What documents? The ones Mr. Blackwood had when he was talking about the Henderson property. They had your bank seal on them. The banker's hand froze halfway to his mouth. I never approved any documents for the Henderson property. Blackwood's jaw tightened. The child is confused. She doesn't understand adult business. But I saw them, Syrah insisted with childlike stubbornness. They were right there on your table when you were talking to that man in the dusty suit. The room's attention focused on the conversation unfolding between hands of cards. What had started as innocent curiosity was revealing cracks in the foundation of Blackwood's local empire. Perhaps we should focus on the game, Blackwood said. His voice carried a warning that made several men at nearby tables look up from their drinks. But Syrah had found her rhythm. Each question appeared to spring from genuine curiosity, but together they painted a picture of systematic deception. She asked about property transfers, about families who had left town suddenly, about the convenient timing of various business deals. The cards became secondary to the verbal chess match playing out across the green felt. Blackwood found himself defending explanations he had never expected to give. His answers grew shorter, more defensive. I think we should play for real stakes now, he said finally. The words carried the weight of a man who had been pushed too far. If you're going to play an adult game, you should understand adult consequences. The room held its breath. Everyone understood that the stakes had shifted beyond simple gambling. This was about power, about who controlled the narrative in their small world. What kind of stakes? Syrah's voice remained steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she arranged her cards. If I win the next hand, you and your mother leave town tomorrow. Pack your things and don't come back. The brutal simplicity of the proposition sent shockwaves through the gathered crowd. This was no longer about cards or money. This was about survival. Syrah looked around the room at the faces watching her. Some showed pity, others admiration. A few revealed naked fear. She was 12 years old, sitting at a table with a man who could destroy her family with a word. "And if I win?" Blackwood's smile was cold as winter wind. "You won't." The challenge hung in the air between them. Around the table, men who had spent their lives calculating odds and reading faces understood they were witnessing something unprecedented. A child was standing up to the most powerful man in 3 territories. Sarah's fingers traced the edge of her cards. The mathematics were clear in her mind. She knew the probability of every possible outcome. But mathematics couldn't account for the human element that made gambling truly dangerous. "I accept," she said quietly. The words fell into the room like the first drops of rain before a storm. Everyone present understood that whatever happened next would change everything. The game was no longer about cards, it was about justice. The cards arrived in Sarah's hands with the weight of destiny. She arranged them slowly, her face a mask of concentrated effort that fooled no one who truly watched. The child's facade was cracking, revealing something harder underneath. Blackwood dealt his own cards with practiced efficiency. His confidence had returned with the certainty of controlling the stakes. Win or lose, he had already achieved his goal. The Washington family would disappear from his territory one way or another. But Sarah's questions resumed with surgical precision. "Mr. Blackwood, when you bought the Miller farm last month, did you use the same bank documents?" Her voice carried the innocent curiosity of a child learning about business. The rancher's hand tightened on his cards. "What documents?" "The ones with Mr. Finch's seal. The ones you showed that man in the dusty suit." Edgar Finch pushed through the crowd, his weathered face creased with growing concern. The banker had spent 20 years building his reputation on careful attention to detail. Every seal, every signature, every document that bore his name was burned into his memory. "I never sealed any documents for the Miller property," Finch said. His voice carried the authority of a man who knew his own business. "Tom Miller paid cash for that land 3 years ago." Blackwood's jaw worked soundlessly. The careful web of half-truths he had constructed was beginning to unravel. "The child is confused. She doesn't understand what she saw." "But the seal looked so real," Sarah continued. Her fingers traced patterns on the green felt as she spoke. It had all the right marks, the eagle with its wings spread, the territorial motto underneath. The banker's face went pale. "Only 3 people have access to that seal. Myself, my assistant, and whoever has the master key to the Territorial Records Office." "Who has the master key?" Sarah's question fell into the room like a stone dropped into still water. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. Everyone present knew the answer. Everyone understood the implications. "I do," Blackwood said finally. His voice carried the flatness of a man who had been backed into a corner. "As Territorial Land Commissioner, I have access to all official documents." "How convenient," Sarah observed. Her tone remained innocent, but her words cut through the room's tension like a blade through silk. The cards in her hands told a story of mathematical precision. She held a straight flush in diamonds. The probability of receiving such a hand was less than 1%. But the real game was no longer about cards. It was about truth. "The Henderson documents," Edgar Finch said slowly. "The ones that transferred their property to you. I need to examine them." Blackwood's confidence cracked visibly. "That's not necessary. The transaction was entirely legal." "Then you won't mind if I verify the authenticity of my own seal." The banker's words carried the weight of official authority. Around the table, men who had accepted Blackwood's explanations without question began to see the pattern that Sarah had revealed through her innocent observations. "I don't carry business documents to a poker game," Blackwood said. "But you had them earlier," Sarah reminded him. "When you were talking about Phase 2, about clearing out the remaining problems." The room's attention focused on the child's words. What had seemed like random curiosity now revealed itself as systematic investigation. She had been gathering evidence through questions that appeared to spring from natural innocence. Blackwood's hands trembled as he arranged his cards. The man who had entered the saloon with absolute confidence now faced the collapse of his carefully constructed empire. All because of a 12-year-old girl who saw patterns where others saw only random events. "You're very observant for someone so young," he said. The words carried a warning that made several men at nearby tables look up from their drinks. "Mama taught me to pay attention. She says people reveal more than they intend when they think nobody's watching." The truth of her statement hung in the air like smoke. How many conversations had Blackwood conducted in the presence of servers and cleaning staff? How many plans had he discussed in front of people he considered invisible? Children often misunderstand adult conversations, Blackwood said. But his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Like when you said everyone has something they can't afford to lose?" Sarah's question was delivered with the same innocent tone, but it landed in the room with devastating impact. Around the table, faces hardened with recognition. The threat was no longer veiled. It was naked and obvious to anyone who cared to see. "I think you've said enough." Blackwood's voice carried the edge of a man whose patience had reached its limit. But Sarah continued as if she hadn't heard the warning. "The families who left town, the Hendersons, the Millers, the Johnsons, they all had something they couldn't afford to lose. Accidents happen," Blackwood said. "Businesses fail. People move on. All at once? All after you expressed interest in their property." The pattern was now visible to everyone in the room. What had seemed like isolated incidents revealed themselves as part of a systematic campaign. Blackwood had been using his official position to steal land through forged documents and manufactured crises. Edgar Finch stepped closer to the table. "I want to see every document that bears my seal. Every transaction you've conducted in the past 6 months." "That's not how this works," Blackwood said. His facade of respectability was crumbling like a house built on sand. "I don't answer to bank clerks. You answer to the territorial governor," Finch replied. "And I intend to write him a very detailed letter about seal forgery and fraudulent land transfers." The room's atmosphere shifted like the air before a thunderstorm. Men who had feared Blackwood's power now saw him as what he truly was. A criminal whose authority rested on lies and intimidation. Sarah laid down her cards with deliberate care. The straight flush gleamed in the lamplight, diamonds catching and reflecting the room's golden glow. But the real victory was already won. "I believe this hand is mine," she said quietly. Blackwood stared at the cards as if they were written in a language he couldn't understand. His own hand, which had seemed strong moments before, now looked pitiful in comparison. "That's impossible," he whispered. "You keep saying that," Sarah observed. "But impossible things seem to happen when people pay attention to the right details." The crowd pressed closer, eager to witness the final collapse of a man who had terrorized their community through legal manipulation and threats. Justice was being served by a child who had weaponized curiosity and mathematics. Blackwood's empire was crumbling. His crimes were exposed. His victims were being vindicated. And it had. All started with a simple invitation to play cards. The wind outside picked up, rattling windows and sending dust spiraling through the darkened streets. Inside the saloon, the lamplight flickered against the growing storm. But the real tempest was just beginning. The game was far from over. Edgar Finch pushed through the crowd with the determination of a man whose professional reputation had been weaponized without his knowledge. His weathered hands shook as he reached the poker table, but his voice carried the authority of 20 years in territorial banking. "Mr. Blackwood, I need to examine every document bearing my seal. Tonight." The words fell into the room like hammer blows. Around the table, faces that had shown casual interest now revealed genuine concern. The scope of the deception was becoming clear to everyone present. Blackwood's confident facade cracked like drought-hardened earth. That's highly irregular. Bank business should be conducted during proper hours. Forgery doesn't keep regular hours, Finch replied. His eyes never left Blackwood's face. Neither does theft. Sierra sat quietly in her oversized chair, her straight flush still gleaming on the green felt. But her real victory was unfolding in the spaces between words, in the recognition dawning on faces throughout the saloon. I've been watching you for months, Mr. Blackwood. Her voice carried the matter-of-fact tone of someone stating an obvious truth. Mama taught me that patterns tell stories. Your pattern tells a very interesting story. The rancher's hands clenched into fists. What kind of story? The kind where powerful people take things that don't belong to them. The kind where families disappear when they become inconvenient. The room's temperature seemed to drop. Men who had spent their lives reading faces and calculating odds recognized the moment when a careful facade finally collapsed completely. You've been listening to adult conversations, Blackwood said. His voice carried the dangerous edge of a cornered animal. Children often misunderstand what they hear. Like when you told Jake Turner that everyone has a breaking point. Sierra's question was delivered with innocent curiosity, but it landed with devastating precision. Like when you said the Henderson family would be gone by morning? Jake Turner, who had been watching from the bar, stepped forward. His face showed the pallor of a man who realized his conversations had been overheard and memorized by someone he had never considered a threat. She's been spying on us, Turner said. His voice cracked like thin ice under weight. I've been learning, Sierra corrected. There's a difference. Edgar Finch pulled out a small notebook and began writing rapidly. Mr. Blackwood, I'm formally requesting access to all territorial land records for the past 6 months. As territorial bank representative, I have the authority to audit any transactions involving forged documentation. The legal language cut through the room's tension like a blade. Everyone present understood that official wheels were now in motion. The game had moved beyond cards and accusations into the realm of territorial law. You're overstepping your authority, Blackwood said. But his protest lacked conviction. Am I? Finch's pen continued moving across the paper. Section 12 of the Territorial Banking Code gives me full authority to investigate suspected fraud. I'd say we have grounds for suspicion. Sierra's questions had provided those grounds. Her innocent observations had revealed a pattern of systematic theft that spanned months and involved multiple properties. The mathematical precision of her memory made her testimony devastating. The Henderson documents, she said quietly. You had them on your table when you were celebrating their departure. They were signed with Mr. Finch's seal, but the ink was still wet. The detail struck the room like lightning. Fresh ink on documents that should have been processed days earlier. The timeline made forgery obvious to anyone who cared to examine it. I don't recall the exact timing, Blackwood said. His voice carried the desperation of a man whose carefully constructed lies were crumbling. I do, Sierra replied. It was Tuesday afternoon, right after you finished talking about Phase 2 of your plan. The precision of her memory was terrifying in its implications. How many other conversations had she overheard and cataloged? How many other crimes had she witnessed and recorded with mathematical accuracy? Phase 2, Edgar Finch repeated. He looked up from his notebook. What exactly is Phase 2? The question hung in the air like smoke. Around the table, men leaned forward to hear the answer. The scope of Blackwood's scheme was becoming clear, but its full extent remained hidden. Clearing out the remaining problems, Sierra said. Her voice carried the clinical detachment of someone reciting observed facts. That's what you called the families who refused to sell. The euphemism was chilling in its casual cruelty. People reduced to problems. Lives dismissed as obstacles to be removed. You're twisting my words, Blackwood said, but his defense sounded hollow even to himself. Am I? Sierra's question echoed Finch's earlier challenge. You said the Washington family would be next if they didn't know their place. You said some people needed to be taught lessons. The direct threat silenced the room. Even men accustomed to frontier violence recognized the cold calculation in Blackwood's approach. This wasn't passion or anger. It was systematic elimination disguised as business. Odessa appeared at the edge of the crowd, her face showing the strain of a mother who had discovered her child in mortal danger. She pushed through the press of bodies until she reached the table. "Sira, we need to leave, now." But the child shook her head. "Not yet, Mama. The game isn't finished." "This isn't a game anymore," Odessa said. Her voice carried the desperation of someone who understood the stakes better than anyone else in the room. "It never was," Sira replied. "Mr. Blackwood invited me to play poker. But he was really teaching me about power, about how it works in his world." The observation cut through the room's tension with surgical precision. Everyone present understood that they were witnessing something unprecedented. A child had turned an adult's condescension into a weapon against him. "I think you've learned enough," Blackwood said. His voice carried the finality of a man who had reached the end of his patience. "Have I?" Sira's question was delivered with the same innocent curiosity that had characterized her earlier observations. "Because I'm still wondering about the Territorial Records Office, about who else has access to those documents." The implication was clear. Blackwood's crimes extended beyond simple forgery. He had accomplices. The corruption reached into the highest levels of territorial government. Edgar Finch stopped writing and looked up from his notebook. "Who else has access to the records office?" The question fell into the room like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples of understanding spread through the crowd as people began to grasp the full scope of what had been hidden in plain sight. "I think," Sira said quietly, "that's a question for the territorial governor." The words carried the weight of a death sentence. In the frontier territories, federal oversight was swift and merciless when it came to corruption among appointed officials. Blackwood's empire was crumbling card by card. His crimes were exposed. His victims were being vindicated. And it had all been accomplished by a 12-year-old girl who had learned to weaponize curiosity and mathematics. The storm outside was building, but the real tempest was just beginning. The territorial marshal arrived as the storm reached its peak. Rain hammered against the saloon's windows while lightning split the darkness outside. Marshal Davies pushed through the bat-wing doors with the authority of federal law behind him. Edgar Finch had sent his fastest rider through the storm. The evidence was too damning to wait for morning. Too dangerous to leave in corrupt hands for another night. "Marshal Davies," Finch called out. "We have a situation that requires immediate attention." The lawman's eyes swept the room, taking in the scene at the poker table. A child sat surrounded by gold coins while the territory's most powerful rancher faced her across green felt. The tension was thick enough to cut. What kind of situation? Systematic fraud, forged documents, theft of territorial lands. Finch's voice carried the precision of a man who had spent the night documenting crimes, all involving falsified bank seals and territorial records. Marshal Davies approached the table with careful steps. His weathered face showed the caution of a man who had learned to read dangerous situations quickly. "These are serious accusations, Mr. Finch." "They're not accusations anymore," Sira said quietly. Her voice carried the calm certainty of someone who had seen justice arrive. "They're facts." The marshal looked down at the child whose straight flush still gleamed on the table. "And you are?" "Sira Washington. I've been watching Mr. Blackwood's business practices for several months." The simple statement carried devastating implications. A 12-year-old girl had conducted a more thorough investigation than any adult in the territory. "What exactly did you observe?" "Forged documents. Threats against families who refused to sell their land. Systematic elimination of anyone who opposed his plans." Sierra's words were delivered with the clinical precision of a court reporter. Blackwood finally found his voice. "Marshal, you can't possibly take the word of a child over a territorial official." "I can when that child's testimony is supported by documentary evidence," Davies replied. His hand rested on his badge as he spoke. "Mr. Finch has provided detailed records of fraudulent transactions." The room held its breath. Everyone present understood they were witnessing the collapse of a criminal empire that had operated with impunity for months. "The Henderson property," Sierra continued. The documents were signed with a fresh seal while Mr. Blackwood was celebrating their departure. "The timing proves forgery." Her mathematical precision was devastating. Every detail catalogued, every timeline preserved in perfect memory. The testimony was unshakable. "I'll need to examine all territorial records for the past 6 months," Marshal Davies said. "Every transaction, every transfer, every document bearing official seals." "That's highly irregular," Blackwood protested. But his authority was evaporating like morning mist. "So is forgery," the marshal replied. "So is theft of federal lands." The legal machinery was now in motion. Federal oversight would descend on the territory within days. Blackwood's crimes would be exposed to the highest levels of government. Sierra stood on her chair and addressed the room. Her voice carried the confidence of someone who had learned to speak truth to power. "Mr. Blackwood taught me something important tonight. He said poker was about knowing when to fold. He should have folded a long time ago." The words fell into the room like stones dropped into still water. Around the table, faces showed the recognition of justice finally served. "Cornelius Blackwood," Marshal Davies said formally. "You're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and theft of territorial property." The arrest was swift and efficient. Blackwood's protests echoed through the saloon as he was led away in shackles. The man who had terrorized a community through legal manipulation was finally facing justice. The crowd began to disperse, but the impact of the night's events would ripple through the territory for years to come. Stolen lands would be returned. Displaced families would find justice. The systematic corruption would be rooted out and destroyed. Sierra collected her winnings with careful hands. The gold coins represented more than money. They were symbols of a community's vindication. Proof that truth could triumph over power when courage met opportunity. 6 months later, the Washington farm sat on a hillside overlooking the town. Sierra tended her garden while correspondence courses arrived weekly from the territorial capital. Her poker winnings had purchased more than land. They had bought education, opportunity, and security. The farm became a gathering place for families who had suffered under Blackwood's regime. Former victims found strength and shared experience. The community grew stronger in the aftermath of its ordeal. Edgar Finch visited regularly, bringing news from the territorial capital. Blackwood's trial had exposed corruption reaching the highest levels of government. Federal reforms were being implemented. The territory was healing. One afternoon, as Sierra worked mathematical problems in her garden, a stranger approached the farm. He wore an expensive suit and carried himself with the arrogance of someone accustomed to getting his way. "Are you the girl who plays poker?" he asked. Sierra looked up from her calculations. Her eyes held the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to recognize threats early. "I'm the girl who solves problems," she replied. The stranger smiled with predatory confidence. "I have a business proposition that might interest you." "What kind of business?" "The profitable kind. For people who know how to play the right games." Sierra set down her pencil and stood. At 13, she had grown taller, but her voice still carried the precision that had destroyed Blackwood's empire. "I only play games where everyone knows the rules," she said. "And where justice is the only winning hand." The stranger's smile faltered. He had expected to find a child. Instead, he had encountered someone who had learned to weaponize mathematics and morality. Perhaps I'll look for opportunities elsewhere, he said. Perhaps you should, Sarah agreed. But before you leave, you might want to meet Marshall Davies. He's very interested in meeting new business people. The stranger departed quickly, his expensive suit no match for the reputation that had grown around the small farm on the hill. Word had spread throughout the territory about the girl who had brought down a criminal empire through poker and perseverance. Sarah returned to her calculations, but her mind was already working on larger problems. The territory needed schools, roads, and institutions that served justice rather than corruption. Mathematics could solve those problems too, given time and opportunity. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of growing things across the hillside. In the distance, the town continued its daily business, but it was different now. Stronger. More honest. Protected by the knowledge that truth had defenders in unexpected places. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.